All right.
Shall we intro time?
Do you want intro time?
Hey, everybody.
Perfect.
Welcome to our show. What's the name of our show again?
Sonic Bloom Live.
Here we go.
It's the name of our company with live.
It's been a busy week. Yeah.
It actually has.
Here we are at Sonic Bloom Live. I'm Eric.
And I'm Justin.
And we are co-founders of the company. What's the name of our company again? I'm just kidding. I know the name of our company. Sonic Bloom. And we cover on Sonic Bloom Live game audio and game industry topics with a spin from people within, a vantage point from within the games industry itself. We're going to keep it laid back and fun and, weekly. At some point, hopefully soon, we're going to start inviting developers in for a bit of an interview, and particularly on the game audio bent. So the goal will be to try to highlight friends of ours, people we know in the network who do game audio, and kind of interview them on what they do and how they do it. So anyway, for now, since we don't have anything lined up today, let's jump in on the news.
Yeah, Microsoft just added Xbox and 360 games to their platform, which is pretty neat. They had a whole little press release on it. The important thing here is that it's xCloud. Game Pass has had stuff on there for a while, but xCloud's like slowly getting support. It's probably because the cloud servers themselves, I think, are like fancy. I think for a while they were Xbox One consoles that were serving the data. They're probably Xbox One X or Series X consoles now. But anyways, now they're supporting 360 games and Xbox games. They had a press release. Almost all the games that they showed were from internal first-party studios or studios that they acquired. And I think it gives us a kind of an interesting point to talk about here, in that where's Xbox's service going? They're making a bunch of stuff free, and what kind of value this might offer to the platform. I think we can kind of talk loosely about it. We don't have to dwell on it for too long because we've talked about this to some degree anyways. So, Eric, thoughts?
It's going to be they're dipping their toe into this and slowly enabling the content. I mean, it's clear that their goal is to eventually put all of the games on the Xbox Cloud gaming platform. By the way, that is actually what they branded xCloud as. xCloud was their prototype name. xCloud is much easier to use in the way that Scarlett and Lockhart are easier than Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S. It's hard to say. Like, they put it on Xbox Cloud Gaming. That just sounds weird. So xCloud. At any rate, there's a lot of these are older Xbox 360 titles. In their blog announcement, they wrote a bunch of stuff about, like, isn't it great when you go back to your save data and pick up right where you left off in 2008? And I guess I don't know. Some of these games that they listed in their list of titles that they added with this round are interesting, and we've certainly played some of them. I think that the fact that they're available in the cloud is a way for Microsoft to test their backwards compatibility system with the platform and put everything together and say, like, can we run the entire Xbox platform over the cloud, as a way to kind of start stress testing various setups for the streaming aspect. And it's a good thing. I think it's going to definitely play into their future a lot, and this is the very first steps that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think it's no secret that xCloud's their future. They probably won't say as much. They'll be like, oh no, it's still Xbox, but really xCloud's their future. I'm sure they see this as a cash cow. That's why they're putting tons and tons of investment into it. I think this is actually kind of interesting because I like to think they're flexing on Sony. Like, that's what they're doing. It's like Sony announced this last week that they're discontinuing the PS3 and PSP and the PS Vita store, and with that goes a bunch of titles that people still might be enjoying that are no longer going to be available to anybody else. I don't know if Sony has stuff in the future planned for that, if they plan on doing a similar service, but right now you can't. And now Microsoft rolls out, like, by the way, here's our oldest platforms, and you can still get the games. So I think part of it's a flex, and it's one of the few values Xbox has over Sony. So if it's strategic, I don't know how valuable it is, but regardless, strategically, image wise, them projecting like here's what the Xbox platform is. It's one of the advantages they have over Sony. So flex it up.
Yeah.
Want to move on?
Let's do it.
Topic number
so
two.
our next topic for the day we're going to dive into is that in industry news, Tokyo Game Show has announced that their TGS has announced that they are going digital only, and E3 came out as well with the same announcement. This follows PAX East being straight up canceled, and GDC skipping its normal time frame, which is kind of the February-March time frame, somewhere in that, depending on the year, and instead going for a July. So they skipped to the summer. I think it's in the hopes that they could do a quasi in-person event and then partially handle it online, but they're still figuring all that stuff out.
A lot, actually, to be fair, a lot of these companies that put on these convention shows, a lot of times it's like the only thing that makes them money. So if they had to like skip 2 years in a row, they're usually hurting. South by Southwest actually was one of those companies. When they canceled last year, they had to lay off a ton of staff. And I still don't actually know if it's like recover the money. South by Southwest this year was mostly online, although they had some physical events because Texas. And these companies are hurting for it. I don't think GDC, or the people who put on GDC, is like some massive company. So once they skip more than one, they're probably hurting a bit.
They are a real. I mean, I don't know how big UBM is, but UBM is the parent company for GDC. But that said, UBM doesn't back the entire thing. In theory, they have I'm pretty sure that UBM is the umbrella corporation, and there is a GDC kind of subsidiary that runs this, and people work for GDC, and that piece would struggle without all of this, and also holding the conference in the heart of San Francisco, is an expensive thing. Without holding it physically, they save a lot of money, but at the same time, paying people salaries with zero income for a year or two is that's challenging.
Yep. Although I think this is the actual point of the conversation, because it's kind of predictable that E3, TGS, all these game shows would be getting pushed off or canceled or whatever, made pure digital. But I think this is actually a larger trend, right? Like most of the stuff around TGS, most of the stuff around E3 is digital anyways, right? There's a physical on-floor thing, but like, what's the point of that besides asking companies to spend tons and tons of money to have press events? And Sony, Nintendo, EA, all these companies have like gotten wise to it. And within the past year or so, even before COVID, we're going, we could do an event around E3, but we could also just do a digital event and have it way better produced. We don't have to jump into the same issues that we usually jump into, where like they'll have something that becomes a meme and they have to work on their PR about why it became a meme or whatever. And this allows them a lot more flexibility. This is where it's been going. So I think there's a real question here, which is like, will it ever return to normal? GDC, I think, is probably the exception here in PAX, but things like Tokyo Game Show, E3, like, will those things ever return to normal?
I don't know that. I think there's going to be a new normal. I don't think it'll be the way it was before, which is it's a little bit of a bummer. And I say that luckily GDC to an extent, and especially PAX, are picking up on the slack here. But you raise a really good point that the big incumbents like the Sony, the Microsoft, the Nintendo, the Capcom, the EAs, like all of those massive companies, Ubisoft, they don't need to pay tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in marketing expenses to go to these big events. They just they have a YouTube channel. Everybody's going to pay attention. Kotaku and like all the gaming journals are going to go and post about anything that they announce. So it's built in, like they've got it in the bag. To me, the more important thing is providing a place for discoverability of kind of smaller studios indies to an extent, but even just the companies that are biting at the heels of the AAA. They're trying to break in and get the marketing done. It's hard for a lesser known studio to make it. The gap between indie and AAA is wider than ever, and finding a way to connect with a player base and really connect with players can be tricky. And PAX the various PAX conventions are really great ways if you can get into the indie mega booth, or you have enough money to fund your own small little booth. It can be a really great way to meet a ton of people and get word of mouth going.
The important thing is having a place for the indies to shine, having the smaller studios, and that's what PAX East or PAX in general is good for. There's a lot of indie development type like shows, and opposed to those companies trying to struggle to get at the big E3s. Let them have their spotlight in like the smaller shows that do better job at like representing the smaller independent developers. All right, let's get on to the last point of news that we have for this week. It's kind of a slow news week, but Ghost of Tsushima was announced to actually be in some sort of development and being optioned for a movie by Sony. This joins The Last of Us, which is going into production in July. Let's see, we also have Uncharted that has been in filming. I think they wrapped, but I do not remember if they did, because their production's been on and off since it sort of started.
Film production in the age of COVID.
Yeah, it's been wacky. So their whole timeline got destroyed, but I believe they wrapped principal photography earlier this year, like during one of the COVID lulls. And so it's really, these are 3 Sony major IPs. Sony having their own film studio and music studio and game studio, it kind of is a natural fit. But I think the thing to talk about here is like, is there a larger strategy to it? And what are they doing with their IPs? Like, what kind of benefit does this provide them?
Yeah, I think it's basically taking something familiar and making a soft bet. From the business standpoint, Sony spent a ton of money investing into Ghost of Tsushima. That game is huge. And, just like their other, The Last of Us and Uncharted. So any way that they can get, ride a wave of recognition and kind of build on the marketing and the I want to say player loyalties, but it's more of their audience, like give the audience more if they seem to be enjoying it. And making when I say a soft bet, it's easier to try to market something that already has a known name than it is to drum up something that no one's ever heard of before. So if they're making another a movie based on the game with the same title, of course they're going to use the same title, because that's going to be recognizable. And in this case, it'll be interesting to see what they do with Ghost of Tsushima. If they're just retelling it, or if they're going to give it an angle. Justin, do you know if there was any specifics on that given, or?
They announced who the current director is attached to it, and it's the I'm blanking on his name. The guy who directed John Wick.
We'll see. With the 3 major ones from Sony right now: Ghost of Tsushima, Last of Us, and Uncharted. Those will be some fun titles to see. They're definitely cinematic material to begin with.
Yeah, I mean they're the more narrative driven pieces. They have more from where that came from, like Horizon Zero Dawn, which I actually think would be really well suited for TV or movie cinema. But yeah, I think there's actually other point in this though that sure. I'd like to make, and basically it's like game hardware and game sales, especially on the console side of things, have kind of been plateauing. There hasn't been a huge amount of growth in the upper end of console sales. Certain games will make a lot more money, and generally the amount of money that gets pulled in per year from the gaming industry as a whole, it keeps growing. So that's not the problem. It's console sales have plateaued. Like they frequently hit this like upper limit where you can see like at max, like somewhere between like 80 to like 120 million units sold during its lifetime. And, sometimes there's higher attached rates to games, sometimes slightly lower, but basically the game industry on the console side has not been budging a whole lot. And this is causing all three companies to think about how it is that they generate their revenues in order to keep growing their revenues. As we sort of discussed here, Xbox has gone with the approach of let's create the premier streaming platform that has all of our content. We're going to snap up studios and we're going to generate extra revenues, not just from the console base, but from the streaming platform that anybody should be able to use. We know it's moving to browser. They're going to make their money there, and guaranteed they're going to start seeing increases in their revenue stream on that alone. Now you look at Sony. Sony historically has also opened up services, but that's locked to the amount of console players that they have. So you have to look at like, how is it that Sony as a company is going to continue to expand its profitability and make money in places that it wasn't before? And I think with this sort of like their aggressive push into taking their IPs into film and TV, this opens up potentially new audiences to their content. And at the very least, may bring gamers over to the cinema side, which still pays into the Sony corporate giant, and maybe helps boost some of their movies into $1 billion record hitters, assuming they can actually get away with making a good video game movie, which has kind of been elusive up to this point.
Yeah, and you've mentioned Microsoft and Sony, but I'm gonna throw the Nintendo curveball at you, and I know you hate that ball. But in this case, I'll bring up that even Nintendo is getting into that game of trying to diversify and find ways to expand their profits. And the big one that I'm thinking of at the moment is Super Nintendo World, where they're branching out into theme parks to try to leverage their IP some more. And specifically in Japan right now, but I'm pretty sure I saw a news article where that was opening
in Orlando.
Soon?
Yeah, they're doing an Orlando-based park as well. It's just it was staggered, and probably even more staggered because of Florida's response to COVID. That got bumped out a little bit further than it did in Japan.
Yeah, well, and so they seem to be definitely kind of making an analogy between themselves. They're less like Microsoft, clearly, and more like Disney. So follow that model. Like Disney's been relatively successful with their parks, so maybe there's something there.
Yeah, there's definitely a push from Nintendo, like Sony, to take their IPs, which are very strong, especially in Japan. But there's worldwide recognition of who Mario is, who
Link.
More Mario than anything else, and that's why it's a Mario world.
There, yeah.
But yeah, like Mario's a really strong character. I think it's recognized world over, and they know that they can merchandise it and turn it into something. That's why they sort of pursued going into more casual spaces like mobile with their games. And they've actually heavily merchandised their stuff in this Mario world that they have at these amusement parks. Help them.
I think it's called Super Nintendo World.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's Mario themed.
Yeah, it's Super Nintendo World.
Yeah, and it's attached to Universal theme parks in Japan and in Florida. So yeah, it's leveraging their IP. Sony just actually has the movie studios it owns and TV studios it owns to leverage IP in a different way than Nintendo really can. They have to option their stuff to other studios for it to be produced, or they have to go ahead and produce it themselves. But even still, like we just saw a Pokemon movie come out. So like it wouldn't be surprising that these things start diversifying and games actually make a strong push into other mediums to really help lift their IP into a more universal audience. Like regrettably, games still haven't done a great job at becoming like widely appealing. It's certainly diversified. There's now tons of female gamers. There's tons of older gamers, part of which is because of the platform, but they still really need to open it up because I think there's still a bit of a stigma, at least, in the other parts of the world where, games and gaming is still seen as sort of like a juvenile hobby when it, there's a lot of maturity in it that's we've picked up in the past, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I guess part of it is that with the exception of some of the titles that we've mentioned, the games industry is still just kind of figuring out how to do more serious and complex storytelling in within the scope of a game, and it seems to be a very challenging thing to pull off.
Anyways, I don't think we need to dig into that any further. Do we want to talk
Sure,
game audio now? Game audio
let's do
topic.
it.
Yeah. Let's see how well you can ad lib this arc.
I'm on it.
Basically, this week I wanted to sort of talk about. Well, we like game audio, right? And this week,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, like, historically, what are the games that have sort of appealed to us that, in some fashion or another, move the envelope forward. And this can be on the technical side of things, like, we went from like PCM audio to, like, I guess dynamic audio systems that we saw in 3D games. Going before that, we had chiptune audio and stuff that's like, electronic module based. So there's been generational changes. We can talk about games that made good use of that I can think of. We can also talk about games that just sort of did an amazing job with whatever they were trying to do and created an experience that was unlike anything prior to that. And we can go back all the way. I mean, I can only go back to like NES at best, and
Right.
probably not talk about much more beyond that because I wasn't really like a early 80s gamer. I was too young. But
I had Intellivision experience, but only one or two games, and
I had an
those
Atari
are
2600.
very much beeps and boops.
Yes.
Yeah, yep, same idea, beeps and boops.
Although there's still like an art in that too, right? Like
I completely agree.
The fact that, like, they essentially said, like, we need to generate a waveform, or not even a waveform. Well, I guess it was a waveform, but it's sound by using like an electronic pulse, and it's like the most purest form, or the most pure form of sound that they were generating.
You usually have like a preset number of resonators that you could program to resonate at a certain frequency, if not just turn on and off.
Yeah,
like some of them were literally. I think the NES chip, for instance, that sound that you hear in so many games, like it's mixed into punches and things. I think that's just literally one thing you can turn on and off. I don't know if you can modulate it at all. Clearly, there are other things where you can set the pitch, and you have like those are like different waveform types.
Yeah, like they had like square waves and whatnot
Exactly.
that were there to form a like what do they call it?
You had options.
Sawtooth. There's
Sawtooth,
there's like all types of these like weird sound waves that produce different quality of the sound, but they're like very like pure forms of audio expression. And a lot of the time it was just programmed in, like, here's how we're going to be producing the sound. It's part of the reason why the sound types on those games are so very rudimentary. And actually that can bring to the first point, which is like Koji Kondo doing the work on Mario and Zelda and producing essentially scores for games that like people had not seen before. It's why he was such like a treasure for Nintendo, doing the type of work for Mario and Zelda and giving it a lot more of an epic feel because of just creating like layered and nuanced music out of, pretty archaic waveforms.
Yeah, well, at the time it wasn't archaic.
Well, for the electronics, but I mean not for sound in general. Like, we had hi-fi audio systems that.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, they certainly weren't going to be able to load up a vinyl or at the time, cassettes, CDs were still just coming, but we had digital audio in some form.
Right.
It was just way too big to keep all that data raw. So they kept it in saying, like, let's do even less than MIDI, and keep it to like a literal turn this thing on, maybe set one flag on how fast it should oscillate.
Right.
That's about it.
And honestly,
you can only have 3 or 4 of those running at once.
Yeah.
Like,
it had its own markup language to actually do it, and like MIDI wasn't codified until 91.
You're right. It wasn't until like the 90s when people kind of got over themselves and decided, no, this is the standard. Because there's something called, there's like MIDI 1.0 and there's general MIDI.
Yeah.
So the history of MIDI is a giant mess. And a lot of the reason for that is because all of the MIDI controller creators, like the piano creators and everything, Yamaha and a whole bunch other companies would go through and do their own kind of
Sound bank
keep the core of MIDI.
associations.
Right, yeah. So your MIDI stuff that you would do on one device wasn't portable to another device.
Or if it was, it may have an unpredictable outcome, which is like, I set this as piano and trumpet, and then it's just like, yeah, but I set it as drums and, violin, and it's just like, so like you could have the same MIDI track running through two different machines, but having totally different sounds coming out of it.
Right. So it wasn't until the 90s when the industry finally kind of got its act together and said, no. Let's all agree that this is crazy. We're going to straighten this out. So before that, we still just, all of the sound chips were built into the hardware. And you literally would just control the sound chip directly.
Right.
That's what it was on the NES and
but in the SNES years, in the Genesis as well, like MIDI was actually a viable platform for composing music and using whatever built-in sound banks that they had for their games. So, I mean, are there any games from that generation, the SNES Genesis era, that are worth talking about? I know of two that I could talk about.
There's one that I have in mind. That was one of the reasons that I kind of started really paying close attention to music. And that's Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment for me, it always had great music from the get-go. And this is, a rare game and whatnot. But there's the first level where you're kind of going up into the ridge along the mountainside. It starts off and it's light out, and as you start walking, it's very soft kind of intro music, and then as you walk to the right, which as you do in all the levels, the background starts to get dark and it starts to cloud over, and there's like 4 or 5 steps of darkening that happen, and then it starts to snow. And as it starts to snow, this extra voice comes in, at least it's in my recollection, and the music shifts into it kind of fills out and becomes this kind of more majestic piece that really matches with the mood of the snow. And for me, that was, I saw that and was like, what did I just witness? And I ran back to see if I could trigger it again, and it didn't work. It was smart enough to know, no, you're in this mode. And it was snowing even when I went back to the beginning of the level. But then when I finished that, I played it again and was very much paying attention to that because I was like, that is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk about like Yuji Naka's work
Sure.
and so the Sega Genesis in general, right? Like Sega came out, or the Genesis came out alongside the NES, not the SNES.
Right.
And when it did, it obviously improved hardware significantly. And one of the things it had really excelled with was the sound chip. Like it was leaps and bounds over what the Nintendo could do. And it was capable of actually some pretty impressive things. One of which was voice emulation, right? When you boot up a game,
Yes.
and you're Sega,
Yeah.
that was you couldn't get that on the Nintendo. You could get it in arcades, but that was something brand new to games. And you're like, oh, I can actually hear a voice, and I can actually hear like polyphonic tones that are filling out like the score. And Yuji Naka within the Sonic series created some of the most amazing music pieces in games up to that point. Like it was very full, like amazing sounding stuff. Even today, like Yuji Naka is still pretty revered for his
work on those games.
Yeah, exactly. But that's one of the other games, like super early on. Getting that sort of quality was sort of mind blowing. Not to mention some of the graphical advances that happened alongside of it. But and the other one I can say, which is also an early SNES generation, was Actraiser.
Yes,
Actraiser had amazing sound design.
I agree entirely.
And I can't remember the composer's name, but it's another amazing like Japanese composer for games. Do you want me to move on to the next generation?
Sure.
Because we got the CD era, which unfortunately leaves out the N64, which it was extremely limited because it was a solid state cartridge, did not have a lot of available storage. And so things like CD gaming, which could do PCM audio, they were making full use of that type of technology. And PCM is basically like full pre-recorded audio that could be played back in the game. And you were no longer like limited to whatever a given sound bank was on a MIDI in a MIDI composition. You could then like have properly recorded audio, full voices, all this stuff was available to you on the CD generation, primarily Sega Saturn, PlayStation 1, and then moving up into the PS2 generation forward.
Yeah, I don't know if the Saturn could do it, but the PlayStation actually had Red Book audio.
Mm-hmm. No, the
Which
Saturn did too, if I recall correctly.
To the state where you could put the disc into a CD player and it would just play the music.
If you're lucky, and if it didn't, it could destroy your speakers.
Cool.
Yeah,
because that was one of the so what I was saying before I glitched out was, I would go and get these music CDs for games that I really loved, and Actraiser was one of them, fully composed. The composer, by the way, is Yuzo Koshiro.
mm-hmm.
At any rate, one of the some of those discs, I was like, oh man, I would love to have this music worth from games back in the PlayStation era, like Battle Arena Toshinden, which I just absolutely love the music of that. And I literally just found a copy of the game at some used store at some point, bought it, and then put it into a CD drive and ripped it to my machine. And now I have, I was able to have all the music on my iPod at that point. And that was one of the beautiful things about that type of music. You could literally take your game and stick it in a CD player and it would play the music.
Yeah, no, it was pretty cool. Actually, one of the standout examples here, though, because there's plenty of games that had like beautiful soundtracks during that era, and it was sort of allowed because of people moving into PCM audio and being able to play Red Book audio and having high quality, like CD quality playback in games. But Final Fantasy VII didn't. It was full MIDI. Or almost full MIDI. I believe they had some pre-recorded things. Like I think, and I could be wrong with this, but like the what is it? The One Winged Angel, the Sephiroth song that had the four orchestral, or full choral piece. That could have been MIDI, but that might have been recorded over it. So
yeah.
But either way, but they did an amazing job with it anyways, because they took the improved sound quality, had really high quality sound banks available. The PlayStation chip itself had really high quality playback. So the type of quality you'd get out of Final Fantasy VII playing back on a PlayStation had some really amazing audio quality, some really amazing audio design, and all was because they could use this high quality MIDI playback.
Yeah, what's amazing to me is that it was MIDI even in the era of that. Now, there are two reasons I can think of that they would do that. One is that the game, I believe it started its life as an N64 prototype.
Yep.
And then they dropped it and went, no, it's too big for the cartridge. We're going to PlayStation because we can do 4 discs or whatever it was. And that's one reason, because Nintendo's tech still was MIDI based. The other reason could be that there was so much music that had to go into that they, thinking like, okay, if we want consistency throughout the game and we don't want to have to pay an entire orchestra, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars to do the music for this, then we're going to have to find a way to work around it on the cheap. The game was so big at the time, and I don't know what the development budget for that was, but it's certainly today's games have much bigger development budgets.
It was at the time, I think, the most expensive game develops.
Yeah, even without a full-blown orchestra.
Right, but I mean, like a long game, 2,
right. Lots of music,
3 discs, and even though it was CD based, and you're limited to 640 to 700 megabytes of data on each disc. And one of the things that they did was pre-rendered backgrounds and everything. So they had these high-quality pre-rendered backgrounds in every single place. So that's eating up a lot of your available disk space. So having full recorded audio and full pre-rendered backgrounds available everywhere, they still probably went right up against the disk space wall. And actually, we know they did because they had to do it on 3 discs.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
By the way, I looked it up. Reportedly, Final Fantasy VII cost $45 million to make.
which at the time,
At
it
the
doesn't sound
time.
like a big deal now, but at the time that was massive for a game.
Yeah,
I mean, all
it's
the
a
way through the PS1 up to through the PS2 generation, like games weren't really games would cost somewhere between $10 and $40 million even at that point in time. Okay, so like PlayStation era, we can move up into like the PS2/PS3. This is when software starts dictating how the quality of game audio, and largely because middleware options start becoming available to developers, and the middleware options are the largely drives the technological advancement in both graphics and audio at that point in time. It's no longer the hardware can do this and this is what you're locked to. It's now hardware can play back audio at this rate. There's some built-in DSP, but basically all of the advancements are now coming from software. So do you have any games that stand out to you during this generation? I hope you're going to say what I'm thinking. And if not, I'm going to be disappointed.
I think I know what you think. So just in terms of the sound design for like probably my favorite game of at least the PS2 generation, is SSX.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
You did it.
And yeah, was that the one that you had in mind? That
yeah,
you
it was.
I would bring
it
up?
was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That game did, especially on the PS2. The SSX Tricky, the follow-up title that was launched on multiple consoles. Graphically, the PS2 one the original did stuff that I didn't see, at least on the again when I played the Tricky on the GameCube. It didn't have certain screen effects that were just amazing on the PS2. But really, the music, when you would go off of a big jump and they would kind of duck and do low pass filtering on the music as it's running and give you that sense of being extremely high off of a jump and play with the music, and you would land and they would bring in some extra music at that time to really kick it in and give you a little like a stinger boost of what's. They did such a great, phenomenal job of rewarding you for sticking a landing.
Yeah.
Especially when the trick that you did was something big that like it just kept me going back to try to play more, and I just like to turn up the volume on that game as a result.
Yeah. I mean, it had a great soundtrack in general.
That too.
With Rozelle. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I
want to play that game again. That game was so good.
They got to resurrect it, but not make it terrible.
Yeah, they did they made one in the Xbox 360 called SSX.
Yes.
Did the whole thing like, but let's name it the original again.
They just didn't actually like honor the original. That was the unfortunate part.
No, yeah, it became like it was like an entire mountain, and it would open up segments of the mountain. It was like, but why? Why don't you just do all the other mountains?
Yeah, let's have set tracks and make it just really fun to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exploring the tracks with all the secrets was great. Anyway, sorry, that's off topic.
Yeah. But that's exactly what I had in mind. It was like one of the first games where you heard like low pass filtering, like real time DSP effects happening while you're playing the game, which was amazing. Plus, to some degree, an adaptive audio system where you get layering, like you'd have in Tricky, you would have,
it's tricky.
All right, fine.
The song is called "It's Tricky."
That's tricky. All right. Well, Run DMC's sample of It's Tricky playing over when you're doing like your super powered mode, all that stuff was phenomenal feeling, brand new to a lot of gamers. I mean, PC games could be doing this, but the problem with PC gaming was you never knew if people had an audio card or not. And so like the PC gaming space wasn't really pushing things like they could on the PlayStation when you go, the set of hardware is this is what we can get away with. And so games like SSX, which was nearly a launch title, if not a launch title, really pushed the envelope in ways that I think could show off what the future of hardware or future of audio design was going to be. And I mean, I guess that sort of brings us up into, I mean, there's tons of advancements that happened. Like 3D audio became a thing there during that generation, was like spatializing audio in convincing ways, having full Dolby Digital, surround sound-esque, and pulling itself away from Pro Logic, which was matrixed 2D audio using algorithms to try to separate channels. This was
PS2 and Xbox, the original Xbox, had surround sound capability. I know PS2 did, at least at the very least, it had on its DVD output, you could get optical audio out into 5.1 channel with Dolby Digital.
Yeah, I think early on Dolby Digital did not support interactive 3D, but I think later on in the generation you had Dolby Digital 3D playback.
Yeah, I don't know. It would do like the games for sure on the GameCube had the capability of doing Pro Logic,
Only
Pro
Pro
Logic
Logic,
2.
yeah. Right. So we move beyond that. Okay, so yeah, I guess we're getting close to time, anyways. We're almost hitting that hour time frame. But
were there any titles that you had just before?
Extra
I know
credible.
you asked. Nice.
Yeah.
You asked me if there were any titles after the like PS3 generation that kind of were standouts, and I'd like to throw that. I didn't. You got to think about it more, but there haven't really been any that come to mind.
No, I mean the PS4 generation was a generation of like actually beginning to like solidify spatialized 3D audio. And one of the my biggest pet peeves through PS3 and the early PS4 was that I could listen to spatialized audio, but it would never mix correctly. Like you just have issues when you turn your back from someone, and you lose the spatialization of that audio, and just sound like they were like 100 feet away from you, to like yell, like whispering to you. And you're just like, this is not tenable. So you have to like keep your attention focused exactly where that audio source was coming from in order to actually keep it in front of you and audible. And then we've said this before in one of our other videos when we were talking about The Last of Us 2, but when I played The Last of Us 2, I was like, this game suffers none of those problems. It sounds fully 3D on stereo headset. And that's the first game where I was like actually like really blown away by this generation and the sort of quality of audio design, that not just the details and everything else that was there, but the ability for them to create a 3D sound space with stereo headset and not lose track of like where the sound was coming from.
So on that note, I would call out the fact that to be a little bit more specific about the problems that we would have with the 3D spatialized audio. Many times in the, this is going all the way back to like the original Xbox gen and PS2 gen, but especially in the PS3 gen and beyond. If you had a surround sound system, it would take quite a bit of configuration to get it to sound okay, even when you did turn on the surround sound setup. A lot of games would have, if there was conversation happening between two characters, it would come through the center channel. And then if you rotate it away, it would almost duck out to nothing rather than go around the channels around you. And it's like, what is happening right now?
Yeah.
Why is it's like dedicated to the front channel and all the other channels are just kind of playing background music? It was like, what? So there were things that were just a little bit incongruent, rather than treating the center channel as just another in an array of that surround space. They treated it as this is where the exposition comes from, which makes sense in some cases, like narration. But when you're having people in the world with conversations happening in that space, it seemed to break down. And the headsets also suffered that problem where if you would rotate it, we could just go to one ear entirely versus the other ear, and kind of rather than do a balance. And to your point, The Last of Us 2 really nailed it with the headphones, where you could kind of turn on the 3D positional with just normal stereo headphones, and suddenly you could hear what was going on and where, which takes processing to do. The game I just finished Ghost of Tsushima this a few days ago, and it constantly surprised me when I have a surround sound setup. I turn that off and I play it through my headphones because it's so good. When I'm running through the game, and there's a lot of time when you like running to an objective, you call your horse, and instead of wait and turn around and look for
Nobu.
Oh yeah, I had Kage and then Kaze, and like so you'd run with your horse, and your horse would come up from behind you, and you could tell if you had headphones on and you set it to 3D positional. I tried doing just stereo headphones, and I was like, what is happening? I couldn't understand it. But with 3D, suddenly I could tell if the horse was coming. I could hear it from behind me, and then I could hear it coming up on the left, and I would start turning the camera and turning my character to face the left, so that when it came up, the camera at least, so that when it came up, I could hit the button to jump on it.
Yeah.
As it passed me. But I knew that because I could hear the positional stuff coming in from the different angles. And that was to me a little bit game changing, because it seriously changed how I was able to kind of experience that game and play it.
Yeah. Anyways, we should probably wrap up. We've gone now a full hour and 5 minutes.
Woo.
Yeah, over time. But yeah, thanks for showing up. Thanks for checking this out. If you have anything you'd like us to talk about in the next week, on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, we'd love to cover topics that you're interested in. Check it out, I guess. I don't know. Have anything to say, Eric? Because my outro is half distracted.
No, it's all right. I think have a good week, and we'll see you next Thursday.
See you next Thursday.